You know that feeling when you're standing in the lab supply aisle, staring at a row of centrifuges and wondering if you're about to pour a month's budget into a machine that will sit idle most of the week? It's a real headache because a bad pick means wasted money, lost time troubleshooting, and maybe even compromised samples. I get it. I've been there, weighing the promise of a high-capacity, refrigerated unit against the risk of overpaying for features I'll never use. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The Benchmark Scientific Z446K is marketed as a tissue-acculturarity centrifuge with powerful refrigeration and a couple of swing-out rotor options that can handle either 6,815 ml tubes or 2,850 ml bottles. That sounds impressive on paper, but what does it actually look like when you set it up on a typical bench and run it day in, day out? First off, the unit arrives fully assembled. You just need to plug it into a standard 120V outlet, level the base, and connect the refrigeration line if your lab already has a chilled water loop. The footprint is about the size of a small filing cabinet, so you'll need a dedicated spot away from high traffic zones. Once it's in place, the induction drive, something most benchtop models still rely on belts for, means there's no noisy belt tensioner to adjust and no grease to reapply after a few months. In practice, that translates to a quieter ride through the spin cycle and a maintenance schedule that's essentially clean the exterior and keep the filters clear. One of the biggest concerns for tissue culture labs is temperature control during spin down. The Z446K's powerful refrigeration isn't just a buzzword. The unit can hold the rotor chamber at 4°C or lower, which is critical when you're working with temperature-sensitive cells or enzymes that can denature quickly once they're out of the incubator. In my experience, a reliable cold spin eliminates the need to pre-cool tubes on ice, which not only saves a few minutes per run but also reduces the risk of condensation dripping back into the sample. For labs that routinely process large batches of media or harvest cells from multiple flasks at once, that steady cold environment can make the difference between a clean pellet and a smeared, hard-to-suspend pellet. The rotor flexibility is another practical point. The swing-out design lets you load tubes at an angle, so when you stop the spin, the samples slide gently into the tube bottom without sloshing. That's a subtle but real benefit when you're handling delicate primary cells that can be damaged by sudden turbulence. The two rotor sizes give you a choice. If you're running high-throughput screening where you need 15 ml conical tubes for each well, the 68-tube capacity lets you spin an entire plate's worth of samples in one go. If you're doing larger volume harvest, say, clarifying conditioned media from a 10-liter bioreactor, the 2,850 ml option cuts down on the number of loading cycles. The downside is that you're limited to swing-out rotors. The unit doesn't accommodate fixed-angle rotors that some protocols prefer for pelleting very small particles. If your lab's SOPs are built around a fixed-angle workflow, you'd either need to retrain staff or stick with a different centrifuge. Programming the Z446K feels more like using a small computer than a typical analog dial. The interface walks you through setting speed, time, and temperature, and the automatic rotor recognition feature reads a chip embedded in each rotor to confirm you've selected the right speed range. In a busy lab, that reduces the mental load of double-checking RPM tables and prevents a common mistake where you accidentally run a rotor too fast, potentially damaging the rotor or the samples. The only trade-off is the learning curve. New users need a few minutes to get comfortable with the touchscreen menus. However, once you've walked through a couple of runs, the system remembers your most used protocols, so the next time you need to spin 6,815 ml tubes at 4°C for 5 minutes, it's a one-tap operation. So, who should actually consider spending on the Benchmark Z446K? If you run a cell culture core facility, a pharmaceutical R&D lab, or a university department that processes dozens of samples daily, the combination of refrigeration, high capacity, and low maintenance induction drive starts to add up in saved labor and reduced sample loss. The value is less about the headline specs and more about the day-to-day reliability. You won't have to stop mid-experiment because the belt squeaks, you won't waste time recooling tubes, and you won't scramble to find a compatible rotor when the demand spikes. For those environments, the initial cost is justified by the throughput and consistency you gain. Conversely, if you're a teaching lab that spins down a handful of tubes per class, a startup with limited bench space, or a hobbyist who only needs occasional centrifugation for simple protocols, the Z446K may be overkill. The refrigeration system draws more power than a non-cooled unit, and the larger footprint could crowd a cramped bench. In those scenarios, a basic benchtop centrifuge without a cold chamber, perhaps one that takes fixed angle rotors, will meet.